what time it starts. They know what.
But I think we can start.
Yeah, we can start. Absolutely.
Because I think we are all here. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you to be here. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jesper Larsson, who will give today a presentation. He's a professor of agrarian history at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, Uppsala. Jesper's research is focused on governance of common pool resources and collective action during early modern period, 16th century to 19th century, which I think is quite interesting. Jesper conducts research in land use governance and animal husbandry, transhuman systems, and the evolution of agricultural systems. Latest major grant is an EFC consolidator grant for the project Transrail. Studies the transition to their pastoralism in 10 Eurasia. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Patricia, and I'm very happy to be here with this presentation, Milk and Pastoralism. And somebody told me today, why do you have so long title on your book? So I will not repeat it here and go directly to this slide. So why milk? So milk isn't the topic that we usually talk about here, I suppose. Even if one of the directors of the Ostroms has a dairy farm and produce milk, actually.
He might actually still be coming.
Okay. So, and I was told I had to present something I'm working on right now. And I'm actually working right now on a paper about reindeer milk. But that's not the whole story behind it. It's also a story. So I will do this presentation. I will first talk about this bigger picture. So why is it important to discuss reindeer milk? And then I will try to do some connections to the Ostroms and the Bloomington School. Then I will go talk about indigenous Sami, and then I will talk about today's paper. The bigger picture. So this is a map seen from the North Pole. So here we have the Eurasian continent, and here we have the North American continent. And what is different colors here are areas with reindeer or caribous. And there is a big distinction between North America and the Eurasian continent, that there are hardly any domesticated reindeer in North America. But on the Eurasian side, we have both a domesticated reindeer and wild reindeer, and it's like half population each. And usually you don't want to have domesticated reindeer close to wild reindeer, because the wild reindeer might run away with the wilds. And so I will talk most about Scandinavia today, or Fennoscandia, and here it's absolutely mostly tame reindeer. But it's what we can see from this map is that it's a huge area we are talking about. So going to the big picture, what's going to happen in this Eurasian continent, this is the outline of the Eurasian continent, is that from the 1600 up to the 1900, around the year 1600, there is a shift from what we call transport reindeer herding with small reindeer herds, and most people live mostly on hunting and fishing, that people start to amass big herds of reindeers and can have hundreds up to thousands of reindeers in herds. So transport reindeer is like a gathering mode. People are mostly gathering food. The reindeers they have them for transport, and that makes the indigenous people in this region really movable, and they can use resources in another way. They also use them as decoy to hunt wild reindeer, and they milk them a little bit. And then you have this transition to a production mode, and that means that now you start to produce food instead. That means that this is what we are actually studying here is one of the big shifts in history, going from gathering to production. It's like the Neolithic shift, but this happened here in the during the early modern period. So if we go to northern Fennoscandia, this is how we can see what's most important here in transport reindeer is that fishing was super important, gathering, hunting, reindeer had a small portion, and trade was of course also important. Then we have this shift and reindeer become really important. They still fish, they still hunt, they're still gathering things like berries and others things, and trade become much more important during this. And of course, this shift has implications for how you organize your society. It has implications for the economy, for social relations, for governing, and for different types of institutions in these societies. So here is a figure that will show the modes of production in northwest Fennoscandia. So going from the 1400s here up to the year 2000. And on this axis, they represent proportion of household in different productions mode. And now we are only talking about households that has reindeer. There are other households in this region. So here around 1400, it's only transport. And then around 1600, pastoralism starts to come. And all these foreigners, they disappear because that's what's happened in this region, that all these different indigenous groups that go to pastoralism, if they don't do that, they will disappear. There are no hunter and gatherers left. And then we have pastoralism, and then we come to ranch, and some people don't really like that we use the word ranch because they think they are still pastoralists. But there is a big difference between pastoralists and what's happened here during the 20th century, and that is that this is a very intensive way of reindeer herding, and this is an extensive way of reindeer herding. So here you take care of your animal, you round them up daily, usually twice a day. Here you let them more or less go loose. And of course you monitor them some way and you round it up twice a year to take out the calves and decide who owns which reindeer and so on. And here the whole family or a whole household, I would say, follow the animals. Here is more like you can send a few from a household to take care of the animals. Yeah, and this paper is part of a bigger project that I run, which I call TransRain. So it's a 5-year project, started this year and will end 2009. And the objectives of the project is to create a detailed depiction of the transition from transport reindeer herding to reindeer pastoralism among indigenous Sami. So I will talk more about the Sami soon. Focusing on governance of natural resources and its effect on social relations and significantly deepen our understanding of indigenous governance. And it's also, we will also like to identify common forces behind the transitions. So what caused the transition? Because when you're talking about this, you always get the question, what caused the transition? And that's a really tricky one to actually really decide, but we have some ideas. So we like to do comparisons with other reindeer herding societies in Eurasia that underwent the same transition. And then in the end of the project, we also like to place it into wider context, the transition from foreign economies to pastoralism in other societies, and a transition in the European context of early modern agrarian change. Because usually when you talk about pastoralist, you see pastoralist as a group that's also not so connected to other people. But we think that to understand what's happened up in North Fennoscandia, you have to take into account what's happened in Western Europe during this time, because these people are in some way very remote, but they are not like an isolated group. They have contacts and they know a lot of what's going on. And I should have said on my first slide, this is a collaboration, this paper with Eva-Lotta Päivi-Schauna in Sweden. So I put this right. Ostrom and the Bloomington School. So why do I present this paper here, and why do I think this paper could be of interest for you? Well, I didn't put much about, I think this is one of my first paper in a very long time, but this is just a preliminary that I don't have any references to the Ostroms or anything to the Bloomington School or scholars like that, because this was so much focused on milking. But I have developed thoughts about this in this book, Self-Governance in Sami Communities, Transition in Early Modern Natural Resource Management, and in a recent article that came out in the summer, August, I think, Self-Governance and Adaptation, Rethinking Indigenous Arctic Histories. So I realized that I had come up next time I need something new in my titles. It can't be more self-governance. But I have been a little bit obsessed with self-governance for a couple of years now, because one thing, when you go to indigenous people and talking about indigenous governance, there's very often that you don't look into their own agency and you don't see how they can achieve big differences in their own economy. So this was okay. Now it happens. So why I think this paper fits this audience good, it is about self-governance, I just talked about. It is a transition that was made by the users. Nobody told these indigenous people up in Northern Europe, I think it's a really good idea if you stop hunting and gathering and amass a large number of reindeer. That will help your economy a lot. This was like, it's coming from them. It's also collective action. It's individuals who worked with others to change their livelihoods. Because this isn't things that could be made only on a household level. You really have to work with other people for many reasons. And one is that we're actually talking about here is common pool resources. They are managing common pool resources. And it is about how use of natural resources and how it was organized. So how did they do to organize, and how did they do to transfer from one economy to another economy? What did they have to do? And here we come up with another word. It's used here often, common property regime. They need to come up with a way to distribute and allocate resources to users. It was not that all users get the same resources, but you have to do something to allocate resources to the new users or users who change the economy. But it's also about frameworks. Even if I don't put in frameworks here, I would say a transition like this is like a massive or hundreds of thousands of different action situations where people have to take decisions about policies and how to manage land. And it's also helped us to organize the inquiries and to understand Arctic environment. And the people living there, you really have to take in the natural resources they are using. If you don't take in them, you can't understand at all what's going on up there. And I think it embraces environmental and social complexity, actually, because this is really complex things we try to disentangle in this research. So let's talk a few minutes about indigenous Samis. So indigenous Sami, they live in northern Fennoscandia. They live in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia, or live. This is their core area, I would say. Of course, they can live everywhere, but this is the core area. And the Sami is the only indigenous group within EU, the European Union, who are recognized as an indigenous group, I would say, because there is debate also what an indigenous group is or isn't. But it's one of many indigenous groups in circumpolar Eurasia. And all people up to the 21st century has only been indigenous people who have had reindeer. So no other groups. Now it's other groups who has it because of many reasons. One is that for example, in Sweden, it's in law actually that only Sami people are allowed to have reindeer, but you don't have that kind of law anymore in Finland. In Russia, there has been a lot of things during the Soviet Union time, where they try to get other people also to get into reindeer herding. So it's not, but still up here, it's mostly indigenous people. In Norway and Sweden, it's mostly. In Sweden, it's only. You are allowed in Sweden to own reindeer if you are not a Sami in some regions, in some places, but you are not allowed to take care of them. Then you need to hire a Sami to take care of them. Yeah. But I don't work with present time. So this is free picture from 1695. And I only put them up here to discuss what was the main resources they used during this time. So people who were hunter and gatherers, they were most interested in fish and in games of different things. And the Pastoralism was very common to take. And here is, and if you were a hunter, you usually had a defined area where you could hunt and fish in. And fishing was the absolutely most common thing to do, to live on. You could do hunting also to do exchange, because furs was quite popular for a while to sell in the 16th century. And as I said, they had also small number of reindeer, but they come to increase. And of course, if you are interested in reindeer, you're interested in grazing land and how you can come in control of the grazing land and use it. So why do I look into the Sami? Yeah, one is that they were probably one of the first to make the transition to pastoralism. There might have been groups in Eastern Russia, really far east to the Bering Strait, that also made the transition quite early. But as an historian, what is super important, that it's actually that you have sources that can tell you something, because that's the only way you can get the information. Well, you can do archaeological excavations, but since I'm an historian, I use written sources. And from this region, we have really detailed early modern historical sources. So what I have used most is court rulings. We had local courts also up in this area where the Sami lived. And we have a law tradition called Scandinavian law tradition. And one feature of that is the dominance of lay judges. And these lay judges were in this region when were Sami, because they should reflect the population in the area. So we had one judge and up to 12 lay judges. And in the court rulings, it is possible to hear the voice of ordinary people. You can say, of course, it's the clerk and it's the crown's clerk or the state's clerk who have written it down. So of course it's not, we have no records of the Sami themselves until the 20th century or 21st year. We have also used written accounts, clergy's of church, scientists and travelers who were up there documenting what's going on. Of course, all these have some colonial biases, of course they have, but taking them together and read them carefully, we think we can disentangle what is the culture here. So they give a broad picture of, and now we are almost going into the paper, but I have that said. So this is just a paper from a court record. You can't read it, it's hard, but this is we can see that they use cheeses. So here is a person who named somebody who has stolen reindeer cheese. And here is 60 reindeer cheeses. And from another person here, Anders Arnesson, he has taken 40, and he has taken 2 other milk stomachs. And from this girl here, he has taken 7 reindeer cheeses. So that's a way we can use this court record to count how many. I will come back to how we have used it. So then I go into today's paper. So, yeah. So the questions we ask here: how did the shift toward enlarged reindeer herding and pastoralism in northern Fennoscandia affect the intensification of dairy culture among the Sami? And what economic, ecological, and social factors shaped this culture, and how did it manifest? And we use the self-governance as our starting points, and we study how reindeer pastoralists adapt long-standing dairy practice on their own accord, and we aim to expand understanding of indigenous groups beyond the usual historical narrative of a mostly static culture that changed only as a reaction to external drivers, often enforced by the state. So I think the last one is an important point for us. There are some early evidence of milking. The first picture of it is actually this picture from 1539. You can see a woman milking what is supposed to be a reindeer. Why people think it's a reindeer? Because it's 3 horns up here, or 3 antlers, you call it. I'm sorry, antlers. They don't have 3, but they have 2 back and they have 1 in the front, like they are connected, but it looks like 3. And but what you can see here is that this person really mix up milking a cow with milking a reindeer, because when you are milking a cow, you are not when you're milking a reindeer, I would say, you are not sitting down on a stool, 3-leg stool, and you don't have a container like this. You are more doing like this. You are standing up and you have your little vessel right under the other. So this picture is from 1923, but we still think that they milked. It's not that they should have been a cow here instead, but they have mixed up the technique of milking. So why is milk so good? Yeah, one reason is that milk is a renewable source of protein and fat that can be collected daily without killing the animal. So that's a really good thing. Where meat is a finite product available only when livestock are slaughtered. So you can produce a lot of nutrients from milk from the animals. And access to forage is a key factor for livestock milk production, and availability of rich pasture allows pastoralists to depend more comprehensively on milk. And we'll talk more about that resource a little later. Milk production in pastoral system is seasonal, as forage availability varies depending on the time of the year, which strongly impact milk supply. And in temperate upland region, the onset of fresh vegetation in spring interplays with the livestock birth of offspring, leading to increased milk yields. Consequently, pastoral diets and practices are directly associated with the life cycle of the livestock. So in short, during the summer, you can milk a lot. And what you really need to do in this society is that you need to preserve this milk. Of course, you can drink it up immediately, but that's not how they do. They try to preserve it in different ways, and one way to do it is cheese. So this picture is just because this is the area, and the area I'm looking into is divided into different districts where the Sami lived. And now I will come back to how we have used the theft of dairy products as a proxy for how much milk there were in the region, or which were the regions that developed the dairy culture earliest. So this is just preliminary result because I have only gone for 5 years, but it's like 700 handwritten pages of court protocols. So it's quite time consuming actually to do this. But what we can see here is that in this region, they have no theft at all. In this region, it's divided actually. So in this region down here, this region is divided into two. So no one has stolen anything here, but here it's a lot, 286 cheeses and 14 milk stomachs. And up here in Luleå, we have 49 and here 32. But I know that next year it will be a theft of 202 pieces in this region. So what we really think is that we might have the birthplace here up for this culture up here in this region, and I will come back to why we think it's like that. So how was this milk production done? Both women and men milked, but as in almost most culture, I would say the preference is that dairy was connected to women, and they preserved milk. As I said, reindeer cheese, milk was also stored in stouts, barrels, and reindeer stomachs, and was left to freeze. And they can also make butter of it. So it was many ways to use this cheese. You can also drink the whey, which is a leftover from making cheese. And they also used milk in cooking. Like you can cook your meat and you can cook it in milk then. So it's very versatile, but the important thing was to preserve milk for the winter. So what we can see in our this region is that we have two types of reindeer culture. One more intense and elaborated in the mountains, an area enclosed to Norway. And we think that this area might have been the first in the whole circumpolar Eurasia to develop an intense and elaborate reindeer dairy culture. And how could this then be explained? Northwest Fennoscandia consists of two distinct geographical zones, the northern boreal forest in the east and the mountainous area in the west. I will show you on a picture soon. And there was a distinctive advantage to expanding reindeer herds in the mountain parts because there you had access to widespread and large summer grazing on alpine heaths and in mountain birch forage. And another thing with the advantages of the mountain is that if you need to round up all the animals twice a day, it's much easier to do that in an open space than to do it in a forest. We're thinking about the prairie landscape in the west of US, for example. It's super hard to have a lot of animals in the forest and then to round them up. We think trade is super important. There is a famous book by Anatoly Kazanov called Nomads and the Outside World, and he used the word nomads as we use the word pastoralist here. And he's saying that pastoralism is a specialization in your economy. And if you do a specialization in your economy, you have to trade with other people because you can't produce everything. And we saw in one of my first slides that they start to fish less, they start to gather less, they hunt less. They don't, in the sources, they don't really have time for that. So they have to sell products and to buy other products. And this mountain area where it's first developed is very close to markets in Norway and to markets in Sweden also. So we think the dairy products, we can see in the sources that they are being integrated into regional trade networks. But we had a bigger picture. We take Europe as a whole. In the 16th and 17th century, we can see an increased trade of dairy products in upland Europe. And one thing we can see, this is not my research, that's his other research, is increased use of rennet. And I suppose not everybody use the word rennet every day, but that is what, if you make cheese, you put rennet in it, and then it start to coagulate and being like a mass of cheese, and you can do cheese. Yeah. And we can see an increased use of rennet during this period. And the rennet makes the cheese harder and more durable. And if you do it harder and more durable, it's easier to trade. It's better to trade, I say. And in Sweden, we can see, in Norway also, we can see an expansion of what we call the summer farms. This is small, it's seasonal settlements with the dairy culture that we went every summer with cheese, with goat, sheep, and cows, and there was a dairy culture where made butter cheese and whey cheese. So here he has the picture of one of these districts. So this is the mountain area. Here we think it developed. Here is the wooden area, and we can see how close it is to the coast here. And there was market here in the spring and the autumn and fall, and then it was a market here in Jokkmokk in the winter. Yeah, so now I think this is my last picture. The change to a more intensive and elaborated dairy culture should be interpreted as a self-governed response by the indigenous Sami. It was driven by concomitant self-governed responses to both external and internal matters. It showed how the Sami adapted to new circumstances and seized the possibility to utilize and reshape the use of natural resources. Okay, thank you.
Question then.
Thank you so much, Jesper, for your great presentation. Actually, I have two questions that I missed when you presented.
Speak up a little bit.
Yeah, sure. My first question is that, I was wondering how, is there any market for the Reindeer milk? Because it's not just like, for me, I just like know cow milk, I don't know if, there is, how much they could sell their reindeer milks in their, Norway or Sweden, if it is a high market, if there is a high market for their milk. And my second question is that if, because you mentioned that they're partly living in Sweden, partly living in Norway, this is if there is any problem when they migrate from one country to another country, because they're maybe from Sweden, and if they wanted to go to Norway, if there is any problem for their model. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these two questions. The first question you said, I don't think we should think that there is a big market. No, but there is a market. It's not like they are asking if people coming over, but it's an important product if you barter or if you go into a market. You have some cheeses you can sell and think for that, but it's not like it's a demand for reindeer cheeses that's somebody like a middleman buying all the cheeses and sending them off. It's not like that, but there is absolutely a market for them. Yeah. But they can also be, I didn't talk about much about that, the status thing to have these cheeses also that you can, yeah, because and I think we need to see them as a part of other things they sell also. So it's just one little piece in the market interaction.
But it's not a part of thing that they just account on it to afford their livelihood. Their daily livelihood. For example, they don't think that, okay, I'm going to produce this much milk and it would cover this part of my life.
I don't think they are thinking exactly like that, but what they need to buy, these people, is flour, because they don't have access to that. And they also need to buy fabrics, like wool and things like that. And what we can see in the sources is that these people who are selling this milk product, they're selling also reindeer meat and things like that. They are better dressed than the people who are living in the forest. We can see that they have more silver. So, and it's super hard for me to actually count exactly how much the cheese do to the calculation of the household income, but because a lot of the cheese was also using for self-sufficiency. Yeah. So what they can do is, since they are traveling, I didn't talk so much about that since I only had half an hour or only, is that they are traveling each year from the, if you have a lot of reindeer, you can't stay in the mountain during the winters. You have to travel down in the forest, and then you travel up again in the spring to stay on this, because this, you can't find winter fodder in the mountain, or if you have a lot of reindeer. So they also store this, they stored cheese along the way. Yeah, so it was also a lot of self-sufficient. I maybe have exaggerate the market integration of the cheese, but it is there. At least it was what I think. Yeah, but thank you. And yeah, migration between Norway and Sweden. No, it was an open border. Yeah. And in 1751, I think it was, or 53, doesn't matter for you. There was a treatment between Norway and Sweden that said it was free for the Sami to access land in Norway for grazing. It didn't affect so much the regions in the south, the Lule area I show a map on, but it affected a lot regions. The region up here, because they had a lot of summer grazing in this region. Here it was more like you went up in the mountain here and you went over here for market. But the Sami could also take advantage of this, because if they went into trouble, they could run over to Norway. Yeah. And as many people who are migrants, or no, not migrant, but that migrate a lot, it was a nuisance for the government some ways, because they like settled people. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I study agrarian transformation, so I was fascinated. I have one question about your presentation, and then two questions out of curiosity that are outside, so if you don't mind. So the first one, if the reason why has anything to do with the enclosure of the commons. I was thinking that maybe that is also part of the story and part also of the Ostrom story. And in relation perhaps as well with colonialism, with how colonial relations were established, if those were part of that transition that you identify. And then the questions out of curiosity. One is if you have recipes, if you found recipes in your archive, just because for me, they have been a super useful way of doing ecological assessments. Like when you look at the cookbook and the actual recipe, you get a good sense of what was available and how the structure and functionality of ecosystems was changing at the time. And the second question out of curiosity, and I know your research stops right when climate change starts to peak, but if you can tell us a little bit more about today in relation to climate change and how it is changing, if you know, because maybe you don't know, but how it's that influencing agrarian transformations today as well.
Yeah, the first question about the closing of the commons, I would say it's almost the other way around. I would say that when they were, and I discussed this in this book here, so you can get a copy, because I have one more copy of it. So when they were fisher and hunters, they knew the exact borders of the land they controlled, but this land could be really big, like many square kilometers. And we think that what they need to have, and they have kind of exclusive rights to hunting and fishing, but also to grazing lands within these lands. And we think the reason for this is that they need to have enough lakes so they can fish, so they can support a household during a year. And if you would have open access or more, let everybody fish there, it wouldn't have been that they had depleted the fish resources, but it might have been that you didn't have enough fish for a household to survive. But when you come to the, when grazing becomes the most important resources, when you go to become a pastoralist, then you doesn't really want to be constrained by the borders of hunter-gatherers they had. Because as I told you, you need to travel. If you have many reindeer, you need to travel. If you have few reindeer, you can sustain them on in a certain area. But if you have many reindeer, you need to travel. So what we have seen is that actually are coming up with a common property regime to negotiate access to different areas. It's not like it was open access. It was not, because they told people that you are here with your reindeer, you are here with reindeer, but you can negotiate this. And how we know this is that they go to the court. So the court is an arena for negotiating. Of course, they probably negotiate most of these cases outside court. But during what's happened in the early modern period on a more general level is that it becomes more important to have written sources that you actually have, not you don't own this land, but that you are the one that can be there. So I mean, we think that, but the arena is a good way to discuss these things. And that we develop in this book here. Yeah. I haven't seen any recipes of milk products, actually. There is a little bit in the sources, but we use a method in our resource. And I mentioned briefly in the paper that we only use sources from the period, from the early modern period. And because what many people have done who have looked into milk culture earlier, that is you use ethnographical sources from the 18th and 19th, and then you like transpond them back in time, and you assume that they have not done any, since they are so primitive, they could think, or they looked at them as primitive people in the beginning of the 20th century. They should probably have done the same thing for many, many hundred years. And that's totally wrong, I would say. Yeah, they have changed a lot of things. And climate change, yeah, there is, I talked about, I mentioned at least, there is a discussion about the causes of the transition. And there is a Russian scholar, he was from Soviet Union, Igor Krupnik, he's in Washington, D.C. now. And he think it's trade, but he also think what's happened, was very favorable for reindeer herding during this period was the cooler climate. So the little ice age, because reindeer doesn't like warm so much. So they want to be in more cooler places. So they go up in the mountain to find this wonderful grazing, but they also go up there because it's cooler and it's more windy. So they don't get that annoyed by insects and mosquitoes, and it's not so much mosquitoes actually, it's another little fly that could bite through their skin that is really a nuisance for them. So if the global cooling was favorable for them, the global warming is not. No. But I'm not an expert on the global warming for reindeers, but there is a lot of papers about that and making things. But I don't really know exactly how they affect it in Sweden right now. But
Thank you. I just one follow-up little comment is that I think it would be super interesting to explore your paper from the literature on legal geography and legal studies more broadly. Because yeah, the figure of the lay judges is super interesting, but some of this literature is doing that analysis of the spatial consequences of legal formations. So maybe a conversation with some things on legal geography might be of interest, I think.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm not so familiar with the topic, but I will look into it. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of material from your sources that really merits like a discussion about that.
Some other question?
So have you looked around to think of other parts of other places where humans have interacted? I'll use the word interact rather than manage wildlife or plants in a way similar to reindeer and compared it. I was thinking of in North America, we have buffalo, Native Americans that interacted with buffalo. I don't think they milk buffalo. I don't know that. But I'm thinking, is there any other literature that you can look at and compare?
I suppose there is. I haven't done that.
Okay.
And in my big project, there is in a couple of years, I will announce a postdoc position that will do that, just that type of comparison with other pastoralists and so. So we haven't done that yet, but I think and I don't think they have milked the buffalo, but I think it's really hard to milk a
I
buffalo.
was thinking of different, there's got to be somewhere else in the world beside reindeer that this has taken place, I would think.
Yeah. Oh, many places, because milk is, for many pastoralists, milk is a really.
But I was thinking of something beside milk. I was thinking of some other interaction with humans and animals, and I was even thinking of plants. I was, there's a cultivation of natural plants that people have done.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
I don't have so much to say, but yeah.
And there's a lot of work on multi-species ethnographies and multi-species history, so definitely.
But of course, it's important to make comparisons with other cultures and so, yeah.
Maybe it's kind of a version of the same question, but it's what if you compare with the historical cases of the kind of the original initial cases of pastoralism and especially, dairy production. So what would be the comparison? The transition here was faster, different. So that would give us some idea. So what are the differences in this transition compared to the first time that other groups transition into a pastoralist? So just to have an idea, and then kind of related to this, I responding to Diana, you already started talking about this, but can you talk a little more about what do you think caused this transition? Because what I got is like that there was a transition, and then you have good evidence that this transition happened, that it happened in different ways in different geographical regions, but probably you didn't have time to go through, or maybe that's because it's future research on what triggered the transition, no? Is that part of a future research, or is just this?
Yeah, in my original plan for the project, I was planning to have a workshop, right, just about the causes of the transition. I'm not so sure that I can have that now because I need enough people working on reindeer and transitions, and so. But I think the causes are, because you always end up what are the causes, because I have been more interested in actually how it affects people, for institutions, for how they change. But the causes are, and and people have come up with a lot of ideas why it. So one Swedish scholar come up with the idea that the transition was probably because this was in the 1780s when the Marxist historians was really prominent, and the idea was that the state taxed the Sami too hard, and they started to require them to deliver reindeer and fish, and that. In that transition, they get poor, and then they started to amass reindeers and things like that. So he saw an out. It's like very typical Marxist history. You have a suppressor, and the people change their behavior. We think it is. I still believe it's the trade. So I think the Sami and all these indigenous people are part of a global trend in increasing trade that comes with we talk about this early modern period is a period when the globalization, the first globalization, and that you start to sell and something, and you get new inputs and things like that. It's hard to really show how it is, but what we can see from our area is that, for example, how the Swedish state, and that's a colonial thing, is starting to control the markets. So they say you need to, we have one marketplace in each of these districts. So in each of these districts, there was 1 or 2 marketplaces. And then in the beginning of the 17th century, the Swedish states put up towns here, very small towns, and every town has the right to trade with each of these regions. And you have to also have, so there are strong arguments that trade is important. There are Russian historians who actually think that because most of the transition in Russia comes after 1721, and after 1721 is when the Russian Empire is really established. And they argue then that makes everything more safe in Russia during that time. You have better control of everything, and it's easier to trade and things like that, because trades in some need strong governments or strong institution, I would say, to really function. So that's the how they see it from some Russian historians.
Can I have a follow-up? It's like you mentioned that you are more interested in the consequences, like institutional and dimensions. But maybe it's good that you talk a little bit about what you think were the most interesting consequences of this process, no?
You mean by
I don't know. You said that you are more interested in the consequences than in the causes, but what were those consequences?
Yeah, one consequence was we're talking about how they actually create a common property regime, so how they can use more land and transfer. That's the one thing. Another thing we work with the project, and I don't do it, it's actually the consequences for the household. If you're a hunter and gatherer, how do you organize your household? If you are a pastoralist, how do you organize your household? It might be, we are not there yet, but I think that if you are a pastoralist, you are more dependent on other actors. You are traveling far away, you have more animals, you need to protect these animals, you have to round them up, you need probably to do alliance with other families, other households, and you might, we know that a lot of these households also have servants, like a maid or a farmhand. We don't call them farmhand here, but since it's not, but so that is one thing we also looked into.
With my next question, that is about gender roles, because you in your archive is really children and women's work, which is something that I found in my own work. So yes, I guess you just answered, but yes, I also had the question of how the household and the gender roles also are changing with this big transition.
Yeah, and that's a super interesting question. And at the same time, you have the colonial perspective there also, that you have a really strong state and a strong church that really wanted people to have family in their in a way according to the law. So it's hard sometimes to disentangle what is the consequence of that you transfer to pastoralism, that you need to have another kind of household structure, and you might marry in another way, you might do alliances in another way, and what is the consequences of how the Lutheran Church really want families to look like, or yeah. So, but we work on that. I don't work so much with the households, but I think that's also a very important questions. And if we can also come to know more of indigenous governance, how they govern themselves, it would be super interesting if we can do that. Yeah, to understand, to disentangle what is indigenous and what is from the state and things like that. Yeah.
But first of all, thank you for your presentation. I don't know if you mentioned this because I arrived a few minutes late, and I don't know if it's a little bit out of the scope of your paper, but since you mentioned the importance of the trade and the establishment of the Russian Empire, I wonder if there are any particular geopolitical factors in Europe in this period of time that catalyzed this transition?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It might have been actually, you can, because when the world became more global in the early modern period, also Northern Europe, this the circumpolar area became more important. So there was a war between Sweden, Denmark, and Russia in the beginning of the 17th century. That was actually, Sweden actually tried to get access to the sea on the north, to get access to the water up here, because they don't freeze in the winter. And then you can control other. Sweden lost that war, but it was a lot of discussion also where the Sami should be taxed. So some of the Sami was taxed in 3 countries. So the Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, or the Russian, for the Russian Tsar up there. So there was so my thinking about that is that it might be that it's also about the market, how they come closer. So you can start to sell and trade and things like that, because this part of the world become of bigger interest for actors outside this region, because it's very sparsely populated. So
Yes, just a small question that can be bigger, but you mentioned in the paper about this diary culture. So if you could just explain a bit more how it has been transformed in this transition, or it's
yeah, here we have some problems to actually know what the hunter and gatherers did, because they also had reindeer. But we think that they also had like a dairy culture. But what we think happened is that it's increased a lot when in pastoralism, and they probably started to do new products also. But we can't really prove that, because we can't really show that. But to do cheese and things like that and have so many cheese, you really have to have a quite big amount of milk. I don't know if you have done a cheese sometimes, but you need a lot of milk to do a smaller cheese. So, and a reindeer maybe now is less than a pound. I don't know so 3 deciliter. Can I speak metric here? So maybe 3 deciliter of milk from one reindeer. So it's small. It's not that much from it, or less than that. So you need to have a lot. So, and when you get more, you have to have more elaborated way to preserve the milk. Yeah.
can change. Okay.
Do they make enough cheese to export it or trade it?
I think that they traded, but they also bartered it with other people because they need people. So people living in the forest, they could produce other things. This, if we call them the hunters and gatherers, but they were reindeer's owner also. One thing they actually bartered to was shoe hay, because it's super cold up there, and if you need to have good shoes in the winter. And how you make the shoe warm is that you collect hay and you put it in your shoe. So that was one thing they could barter with people in there. So yeah, absolutely. It was part of an economy.
Okay, I think we are on time.
Very appropriate for the workshop. You made a statement that you weren't sure how this fit the workshop. This is right.
Exactly.
No problem.